Howdy folks, Dart here with another biking video. In this video, I cover my newly restored 1996 Giant Iguana 630. About a year ago, my sister got a 1992 Specialized Hard Rock Ultra, which I got a chance to take out on a trail. Unfortunately, I really didn't get to get a full feel of the bike since the trail was really muddy and I spent most of the ride trying to get around the mud. Nevertheless, the bike left an impression on me, and I wanted to get my own 1980s to 1990s full rigid mountain bike to take out on the trail as something different from a modern mountain bike. This came to fruition when in November of last year, I purchased this 1996 Giant Iguana 630 from a local pawn shop. Unfortunately, I was unable to ride it for quite some time due to its condition. It needed a lot of love. In addition, I had a Mongoose Redonda project that I was working on that prevented me from getting started on it. Since that project was also for my sister, I wanted to finish that project and return it to her to clear out some space before getting started on the Giant. In addition, the Mongoose project also gave me some practice with my technique for the fade paint job I went with on the Giant. With a bent fork, one wheel bent, the other wheel had a rusted and chipped bearing race, several missing cables, other missing or damaged parts, and lots of rust. This bike turned out to be my most extensive restoration project to date. To begin the restoration, I completely dismantled the bike and stripped the frame and newly acquired fork down to the bare metal. Once the frame was stripped, I cleaned it up with some denatured alcohol and primed it with Spray Max 2K epoxy primer. To get the letters and logo, I then sprayed the area where they would be with Montana Gold Shock Black as a base coat with several coats of Rust-Oleum Bright Coat Metallic Finish Chrome. Once I had sufficient time to dry and cure, I applied a set of vinyl decals over the chrome to mask off the lettering and logos. For the main colors, I went with fluorescent acid green and shock black from Montana Cans Gold. I then removed the vinyl decals and touched up the chips left behind. Unfortunately, I didn't rough up the surface of the chrome in fear that I'd dull the polished look. However, that proved to be a mistake as the paint that covered the chrome had trouble sticking to it. Lesson learned. Next, I clear coated the frame and fork with several coats of Spray Max 2K High Gloss Clear Coat. While the frame and fork was drying, I cleaned up the handlebars, headset hardware, crank arms, and wheels. In doing this, I painted all but the cranks, which I polished up with sandpaper and steel wool. In addition, I cleaned up the seat post quick release, both derailleurs, the crank spindle, and all bearings. Once all this was done, I was able to move on to final assembly and adjustments, replacing all of the cables, cable housing, and ferrules while I was at it. With restoration and adjustments completed, as well as a few short rides around the neighborhood to ensure everything was in good working order and ready for the trail, it was time. I finally get to take it out and enjoy the fruits of my labor. But first, an overview of what I'm working with. While I'm not exactly a fan of rim brakes, that's what mountain bikes were working with in the 90s, and this Giant is no different. This particular bike came equipped with Shimano Altus BR-CT91 cantilever brakes on the front and rear, which is a common setup on bikes of the era. These bikes are a bit more of a challenge to set up than the V-brakes that we see on a lot of modern rim brake equipped bikes. Despite this, once set up, they work as well as V-brake setups, meaning they have adequate power to stop the bike, but tend to squeal a bit when dirty or wet and during the first few brake applications. Moving on to the drivetrain. It has a Shimano Acera X FD-M291 front derailleur, shifting the gears on an SR Microdrive PowerFlow F 24-34-42 chainring. To put the power through the drivetrain is a set of 170mm SR Microdrive cranks with a pair of race-face Chester pedals. I'm normally not a fan of 3x setups like this since they can be fiddly to adjust and a bit more work while changing gears than a modern-day 1x setup. Despite my normal feelings regarding this setup, it's what mountain bikes of the era were using. In addition, I did find that the gearing on this bike never left me looking or wishing for another gear, as I was always able to find the right gear for the situation. With the bike being in my quiver to give me that 90s mountain bike experience as something different from a modern mountain bike in mind, I did find that shifting the front was kind of enjoyable. In the rear of the bike, it has a Shimano Acera X RD-M291 long cage rear derailleur, pulling the KMC Z7 chain over a Sunlight 7-speed 14-28 tooth freewheel. Shifting is a bit slower than on a modern derailleur, but still quick enough and it's accurate. I also didn't notice any chain slap on bumps unless I was going over something pretty harsh such as a boulder. Putting the power to the ground is a pair of Kenda K816 26 by 2.1 inch tires. Normally, I'd want to choose my tires based on the terrain that I'm riding, but in this case, I wanted to choose a tire that gives what I think of as a 1990s mountain bike look. I think these tires fit that bill perfectly. As for performance, they do okay on most surfaces, but when pushing the bike hard or on drier surfaces, they lose their grip pretty easily. Couple that with a rigid fork and being tubed only, meaning higher tire pressures, it makes for a sketchy ride when going fast over bumpy, dry terrain. These tires would likely be better suited for softer, muddier terrain. Despite the performance on the trail, I'm going to stick with them simply because they really give the bike the look that I'm after. Providing shifting and braking are a pair of Shimano Easy Fire EF500 drifters. Originally, the bike had a pair of Shimano Acera X SB-M290 drifters. The Aceras are more like indexed friction shifters than the trigger shifters we see on modern bikes, and even on many bikes from the 90s. Like my sister's 1992 Specialized Hard Rock, which has regular trigger shifters. Unfortunately, I was unable to use the Aceras because the front shifter would not hold a gear, making all of the gears but the easiest gear useless. I tried to repair them, but I was unable to do so. Since my wife and I never ride the Schwinn Twin Tandem and it has a pair of Easy Fire drifters, I scavenged them from the Tandem to install on the Giant. While the cable pull ratio for the brakes was a bit tricky to dial in, the brake levers work comfortably and the shifting is easy and reliable. I also replaced the original slide-on grips, which were beat up, cracked, and worn anyway, with a pair of fabric-branded half-and-half lock-on grips. I found these grips to be pretty comfortable and don't have any complaints so far. I think they also look pretty good as well. For the saddle, I wanted something that looked like it belonged on a 90s bike to me. Not something thin, sleek, and narrow like you see on modern mountain bikes, but something that's a bit thicker and wider. I also didn't want it to be too large that would be akin to a cruiser comfort saddle. I ultimately opted for an HD GTSA Bike Saddle A, which is a cheap gel saddle from Amazon. The saddle definitely gives off the look I was going for. However, its comfort leaves a lot to be desired. It's comfortable on shorter rides over smooth surfaces, but on extended rides over rough terrain, it left me a bit sore, even while wearing padded bike shorts. How does it all come together? In a word, fun. I find the narrow handlebars, short wheelbase, and 26-inch wheels make for a snappy handling bike, sometimes a bit too snappy. In addition to its snappy handling, the rigid fork and hardtail means there's no pedal bob, and more of the power you put through the pedals reaches the ground than on a bike with suspension. This means that the bike is fast. It accelerates quickly due to the 26-inch tires, and it's also reasonably easy to maintain due to the pedaling efficiency of the rigid fork and hardtail combo. Put that together and you have a bike that gets up to speed quickly and doesn't have to slow down as much for corners. This allows you to get down the trail quicker than you would be able to on a larger bike or a bike with suspension, provided that the terrain is smooth. With it being fully rigid, you have to choose your lines on the trail much more cautiously, as the tires are prone to leave the ground when hitting too rough of a bump too fast or too many bumps in quick succession. This also means that hitting bumps can cause the bike to get squirrely on you, ultimately causing a crash if you're not on top of it. Another point of note with it being fully rigid is that it can be brutal on your body. It can jar your spine and make your arms go numb with all the bumps and no dampening to soften the blow. Your body takes all the force of every bump on the trail. Yes, the tires do soften the bumps a little, but it's very little and not very noticeable since they're not tubeless and need to be run at higher tire pressures to prevent flats. I have the tires on this bike pumped up to the recommended 40 psi, which doesn't noticeably soften the bumps and also reduces the amount of available traction on loose surfaces. This lack of cushioning means that to comfortably ride this bike, you need to be standing on the pedals quite a bit more than you would on a modern hardtail with a suspension fork. With it being fast, having snappy handling, little traction on many surfaces, and a bone-jarring ride, why would anybody want to ride it, you may ask? There's a few reasons, actually. The first and most logical reason to ride a bike like this is basic skill training. This bike is unforgiving to mistakes in your fundamental mountain bike skills, such as cornering, gear selection, line choice, and body position, to include standing on the pedals and using your body as a suspension to absorb the bumps. An unforgiving bike forces you to learn these fundamental skills that can be easily forgotten when riding a bike with suspension. When you have suspension, you can typically power over obstacles with little concern for traction or ride quality because the suspension takes care of that for you. The more suspension you have, the more this effect is compounded. This can be seen to the extreme on long-travel full-suspension bikes, such as those used for enduro or all-mountain riding. Using a bike like this to keep your basics sharp is a valuable tool to have, as these basic skills drastically improve your riding performance, even on bikes with full suspension. Secondly, it's pure and simple fun. I find myself able to go faster on this bike than I can when riding any 27.5-inch or 29-inch wheeled hardtail that I've ridden thus far. Getting a bit squirrely on bumps, obstacles, around corners, or on loose surfaces adds a bit of spice to the ride and keeps you on your toes. The third and final reason to ride a fully rigid mountain bike ties in with the second reason, and that is variety. When you ride the same trail or trails on a regular basis, they can get kind of boring. Many of us just can't up and travel to find a new trail to ride to keep the interest up. When that happens, riding a bike like this after riding a modern mountain bike makes the trail more challenging, keeping your interest in the sport alive and well. Lastly, who is a bike like this for? The answer is actually quite a few of us. If you're just getting into this sport, or on a low budget and have someone that can help you with selecting a bike like this is a solid choice for your first mountain bike. These bikes are rugged and can often be found in good condition for $100 to $150 if you search enough. The prices can be a bit high due to the current demand for bikes. You can still find a good deal on one if you look enough though. It's also good for the experienced rider looking to get a feel for how mountain biking used to be, or for something different to ride on the trail and keep that interest in the sport alive. These bikes also lend themselves very well to commuter or gravel bike conversions, making them a good option for a budget-minded and maintenance-savvy buyer of those types of bikes as well. Do you have any experiences with this kind of bike? If you do, please leave a comment. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.